So welcome to the last session for today. I just heard that you've had a long day already. So my name is Alexandra Homolar, and I'm Professor of International Security at the University of Warwick in the UK. And it's my absolute pleasure to chair today's lecture, this evening's lecture, by Professor Kriesberg on populism, constructive and deconstructive. So I'm sure you've looked up all the speakers, but I think we're very, very lucky to have Professor Kriesberg here. He is Professor Emeritus of Sociology and Maxwell Professor Emeritus of Social Conflict Studies at the University of Syracuse in the United States. And Professor Kriesberg's research focuses on social conflicts, conflict resolution, interstate and intercommunal conflicts, as well as constructive struggles. So I believe we hear a bit more about populism from this perspective this evening. He has published very, very widely, so I'm not going to go through this, but I believe over 160 books, chapters, and articles, and also many, many books. So please do have a look at his work. It all looks very interesting. So we keep to the format as we've just learned. So after Professor Kriesberg's lecture, you'll be divided into groups to discuss the topic amongst yourselves. And then we'll be back here for questions and discussions. So given that we've already a little bit later than the 6 o'clock, without further ado, I'll hand over to Professor Kriesberg.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm really delighted to meet with so many people from around the world. As a young sociologist in the 1950s, I earnestly searched for ways that might foster international and societal peace. I discovered that other academics in the United States, Norway, West Germany, and England were doing research and testing practices to avoid war and other kinds of destructive relations. In the United States, the misleading term conflict resolution became the name of the field. I certainly excitedly began doing research and published articles and books about what actions yielded good conflict transformations, not the more frequently studied terrible outcomes. I and others were increasingly recognizing that conflicts are not necessarily bad. In fact, they could be necessary. They're inevitable anyway, but necessary for increasing justice and equity. For example, in the United States, the struggles and victories of African Americans for civil rights were and are widely celebrated. In all societies, there are rules about how to wage and resolve conflicts. Countries have complex laws regulating conflicts and institutions to implement them. In addition, informal actions are then taken to influence the political and legal procedures. Importantly for us here, it is useful to know how more or less constructively or destructively each adversary in a conflict acts. As the conflict emerges, escalates, de-escalates, and is transformed. Judging the degree of adversary actions being constructive or destructive is necessarily a normative matter based on principles or UN conventions or religious faith or other grounds. For example, I regard the 2011 Occupy Wall Street encampments across the United States and some other countries to be largely constructive in goal and means. The protesters had the goal to reduce the extreme income and wealth inequalities, and I believe such extreme inequalities are harmful for the whole country and the people living there. The protesters relied on persuasive methods. They decried the ill effects of the increasing income and wealth inequalities. They unmasked the Republican Party falsehood that the economy would flourish if the rich got richer and they invested their money. They got a lot of attention, the protesters, but they did not generate ongoing actions to foster specific policies and reduce income and wealth inequalities. You may be asking what this is discussion about constructive and destructive conflict has to do with populism. Well, definitions of populism vary, but whatever the definition, I think populism can be regarded as a kind of conflict. Populists strive to advance what they regard as desirable, blaming particular others who are denying them what they would like to achieve. For example, working people whose wages have stagnated and thereby relatively declined compared to well-paid managers may adapt a right-wing populist idea, blaming the elites who support importing goods and immigration. In reality, this is a mistaken form of scapegoating. Falsehoods are characteristic of right-wing populism and conducive to destructively waged conflicts. A basic element in applying a constructive approach is to carefully analyze the conflict before deciding what policy would really correct the problem. I must say more about the features of a constructive conflict before applying it to right-wing populism. A basic feature in the constructive conflict approach is that persuasive and rewards are important inducements and maximized, while severe coercion is minimized. The blending of those three kinds of inducements should vary and shift thoughtfully during a struggle. In addition, attention should be given to ascertaining what the opponent's interests and priorities are. Furthermore, possible shared identities with the opposing side or elements in it should be sought. Narrow, self-serving goals to be achieved at the expense of the adversaries characterizes destructive conflicts. The conflict is viewed as zero-sum. Finally, dehumanizing the adversary should be avoided. So now I can focus my discussion on ways the constructive conflict approach does and might do more to alleviate the undesirable aspects and consequences of right-wing populism. I'll also draw on conflict resolution knowledge. To begin, I examined several features of right-wing populism and suggest their attractiveness for adherents, where they do obviously have adherents. Then, given that analysis, I can note how constructive conflict policies might alleviate or transform the destructive right-wing conduct. An important and common feature of right-wing populism is fostering dangerous nationalism, or better called nativism or ethno-nationalism. That can be attractive to people who feel grievances from declines in their status, class, or power ranking. For example, that could be seen in the promotion of white nationalism in the United States. It can also provide anti-Semitic scapegoating applications. Some whites emphasize their identity, national identity, and form groups which conduct demonstrations and even threaten African Americans, Jews, and others they believe to be non-white. As a consequence, some lone wolves or mentally disturbed persons use readily available weapons and commit mass murders. Immigrants became more prevalent in many countries in recent years, and in many countries they were and are viewed as non-white burdens. Indeed, in many countries, objections to them become a major feature of right-wing populist doctrine. There's a research study about the characteristics of the persons in the United States who were arrested for their actions in the January 6th insurrection in the US. And that research is relevant. The only correlate found was residents in neighborhoods with high numbers of immigrants living in there. Immigration concerns are also important, obviously, in electoral contests in many countries. So policies that manage good entry and settlement of immigrants can alleviate disruptions and maximize collective benefits. The United States has celebrated its immigration at times in the past, but also rejected particular non-white immigrants at other times. As a child, I knew the US was supposed to be a melting pot. No more. Diversity is now widely accepted here. There are programs to increase diversity in many organizations. Many conflict resolution practices are adopted formally and informally. For example, personally, I have been a board member of a citywide interfaith organization. And after 40 years, I'm still a member of an Arab-Jewish dialogue group for peace in the Middle East. Misogyny is also a common element in right-wing populism, unless the populist leader is a woman. Misogyny also may provide solace in some men for declines in their class status or power ranks. Lowered rank in male status ranking may find solace in and be susceptible to right-wing populist misogyny. The increased status of women and their associated autonomy and entry into new spheres of work could be experienced positively by men. After all, they can share in the pleasures of their mother, wife, sister, or daughter. Moreover, men can experience the pleasures of a less rigid male role. Nevertheless, the shifting of gender roles also can be experienced by some men as troubling disruptions of their expectations. Misogyny may be a response. Indeed, new policies may be helpful. Arrangements, particularly for childcare, need to be expanded, especially in the United States, including funds and making schedules more flexible. The decline in the status ranking of some men and women may be a spur to scorn deviance from what is seen as normal, the style of lifestyles for others' reasons as well. People in the LGBTQ community are harassed by some right-wing populist adherents, enhancing the value of their normalcy. The final characteristic of right-wing populism that I'll mention is the undemocratic authoritarian leadership of one person or small group. Often the leaders proclaim a dogma and insist upon its acceptance. These elements characterizing right-wing populism can serve as grounds for solidarity and support to populist leaders who promote them. They form new groups as the old ones decline. However, simply telling people that they are wrong in their feelings is unlikely to change them. That's where better paths can be derived from the constructive conflict approach and from the conflict resolution field. One idea is to study possible explanations for the appeals of elements of right-wing populism, in particular in any society. In the United States, I think a major one is the ever-increasing concentration of wealth and corporate ownership. This is associated to increasing overlapping concentration of political power. Very unfortunately, but very clear. A facet of these trends is the classic inequality, the rise of class inequality beginning, say, in 1989. It started earlier, but it really took a greater jump with Ronald Reagan's presidency. Stagnated wages began which resulted in a feeling of declining because it's relative to the exceedingly rising pays and earnings from investments. The Republican Party embraced supply side or trickle-down economics, which favored policies that said that rich people should get more money, and then the society will be, the economy would grow. Of course, that's not true. There's very clear evidence that what the Democrats are more likely to do, which is to benefit less only a bit more than otherwise, and tax a bit, but not as much, but more than the Republicans would. Furthermore, the Republican Party under Reagan grossly reduced the members and powers of trade unions. This reduced many men's sense of manliness. The right-wing populist leaders promote policies that aggravate, not redress these trends. Decades ago, Republican Party leaders instituted policies that made the party more likely to be taken over by a Donald J. Trump. In 1987, President Reagan ended the Fairness Doctrine that required that radio and television stations provide free time for responses to controversial statements that were aired. That change allowed Rush Limbaugh to become the radio personality. He aired daily, extremely radical right-wing statements and stories. He developed a huge devoted following until he died in 2021. Other right-wing pundits also led smaller, similar shows. Then in 1996, Fox News was established with a radical conservative bias. Some Republican Party leaders adopted the falsehoods and abuse of Democrats. This was notably the case for the Republican Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, 1995 to 1999. He insisted that Republicans denigrate the Democrats. He rejected any cooperative actions. In contrast, the advantages of more collaborative policies should be noted and pursued. So, having said all that, I want to say that there is, and it's been all along also, everlasting resistance in the United States to the growing wealth and power concentration. And that should be recognized. This can be seen in liberal and social democratic movements and many religious, occupational, and other identity organizations. Moreover, many people in the United States holding various status identities have made considerable upward progress since the 1940s. Most notably, this is the case for African Americans, women, and members of the LGBTQ communities. They mostly used constructive conflict methods in transforming their contentious relations. Some grievances remain. Some may be dealt with through the traditional political processes. Others may be reduced in struggles waged constructively. Some may be part of a left-wing populist movement. Consider the case of African Americans acquiring reparations for many deprivations in the past. That's a grievance for many African Americans now. Indeed, here and there in local communities, whites and African Americans have made arrangements for reparations. That may be something that very few of you have heard of. But for example, in 2019, whites and African Americans in Evanston, Illinois, that's a suburb of Chicago, where I come from, began a process to end structural racism and pay reparations to African Americans who suffered losses due to prior discriminatory residential practices. Other cities are undertaking similar practices. Through the political process, improvements in the working conditions and wage orders sometimes occur. For example, President Joe Biden has managed to pass some legislation to restore greater trade union participation and engagement. Workers and the public at large are increasingly sympathetic to unions. This can constructively reduce grievances. The many dire consequences of right-wing populist action are being directly and indirectly countered in the United States. For example, the destructive conflict style of Donald J. Trump and his MAGA followers has generated extreme polarization and is widely deplored. Consequently, some people attempt to overcome the unseemly hostility, conflict resolution practices, and the constructive conflict approach have been tried unsuccessfully and successfully. For example, in the June 28th New York Times, there is an article about attempts to create settings to overcome the polarization. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the MacArthur Foundation, and the Emerson Collective, and others formed what they call Trust for Civic Life. It will award its first $8 million to 20 groups judged to be most promising in rebuilding civic life and reinforcing democracy. Well, I trust I have convinced you that a constructive conflict approach can enhance understanding the sources of right-wing populism and how its unfortunate consequences can be mitigated. Now, before I conclude, I will make some observations about right-wing populism in the international affairs. I'll discuss three primary processes and the international interaction relating to populism. One process is contagion. Populism in one country serves as a model for action in another, if it's successful, they may be more adapted. The Arab Spring, beginning in Tunisia in 2010, is an example of rapid spreading of democracies and left-wing populism. The nonviolent actions that won redress from the grievances of subjugation to autocratic rule rapidly prompted latent conflicts to become manifest in several Arab countries. What happened thereafter is another story. But another process is state or non-state intervention fostering populism from one country into another, covertly or openly. During the Cold War, this was very widespread. The Soviet Union lent aid to communist endeavors in many places. The United States conversely aided anti-communist movements and governments. Since the end of the Cold War, terror attacks against the United States unfortunately spurred the global war on terrorism. The result has been autocracies and some democracies. Currently, Some countries actively engage in coercive efforts, including violence, in solidarity with countries having similar political systems. Another international consequence of many countries having high degrees of right-wing populism is the weakening of international cooperation, even as international cooperation is increasingly important. The third process pertains to non-governmental organizations and social movements that act internationally and may influence domestic affairs. Indeed, some support right-wing populism. For example, that is the case for the missionary work of evangelical Christians. On the other hand, there are international non-governmental organizations that counter right-wing populism. For example, that is the case for resistors to global warming. To conclude this presentation, I call to your attention the grave circumstances in which we live, the disorders and divisions that confront us threaten to confound our saving responses. Despite this, I offer the option of creating deliberative democracies. The dreadful disasters generated by global warming may be the occasion for teachable moments. Responding effectively to global warming requires informed collective action deriving from widespread deliberation. We must avoid misinformation and self-serving immediate gains. We can be saved by recourse to constructive fighting and collective decision-making processes that entail fairness and knowledge. That's enough from me for now. I would hope I stirred you up, and I look forward to some further discussion after you take your turn at discussing these matters.
Thank you very much, Professor Kriesberg. Thank you very much. So I guess I hand over for you to be distributed into small groups, and we meet back here, I believe, in about 20-ish minutes. Is that correct?
Thank you so much, Professor Kreisberg, for this excellent presentation. Alexandra, they'll be in the breakout rooms for, let's say, 15 minutes. Now it's 40. Be here at 18:55. And in the meantime, you and Luis can just have a small rest, and then we'll convene again here.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Have fun discussing, and see you in a moment.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, Shema, I think she'll just
Now,
send you to the rooms. Just a moment. George, did you get an invitation?
This is invitation to.
And not for you, Luis, not for you. There is one participant still in our room. He needs to go to his breakout room. I'm trying to make it sure if he saw the invitation. George?
Hello, Asifi.
Hello, George.
Yeah, actually due to some issue, I have to. I'll take 10 minutes break. Yeah.
Okay. You are not gonna join the.
No, I will be joining back for the next section.
Okay. No
Okay.
problem.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Okay, I'll mute myself again.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Professor Kriesberg, if you're talking to me, you're muted. I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I said, if you're saying anything to me, I can't hear you because you were muted.
Well, I just thought I unmuted myself.
Yeah, you unmute yourself now. You can be heard now. We will wait for 5 more minutes for everyone to prepare their questions, and they will be back in 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Thank you so much.
I enjoyed it. It's been recorded. When will that be available for people to see?